Okay, good afternoon everyone. Thanks Dr. Govil for having me here, and thanks Team Medanta. I know it's been very tiring session for you also, but it's also very important session. In a way you get quite a bit of MCQs from this topic. So what I will do is, I will not brainstorm too much. I will tell you the straight answers and try to give you the clear message which is good for you also. You are not really very tired. So just bear with me, I'll try to finish it faster as well. I'll skip many slides which are brainstorming fights. I'll give you the clean messages from exam point of view. So is that okay? Or you want me to go ahead and detail talk and something like that? No? Okay. So we'll start with it. So when we talk about the endocrine emergencies, what we do exactly is we look into the related to ICU myxedema coma, thyroid storm, acute adrenal insufficiency, pituitary apoplexy, pheochromocytoma crisis, acute hypercalcemia and hypocalcemia. So endocrine emergencies we rarely come across, but when we come across it's really googly. I mean, very frankly, many of us miss it when it comes to it. Like when you, I'll tell you when we come to the topic, because we are so much trained in critical care. Many times it's a clean, clear-cut picture, but we tend to miss it. So when it comes to hypothyroidism, always think of a beautiful lady having issues. So there must be, if it's a hypo, it's a hair loss in both the cases, inability to think clearly, which is very common in beautiful ladies, goiter, reduced heart rate, so could be the palpitation. I'm sorry if I'm offended, yeah. So fatigue, which is every time there with everyone, dry skin. So there are too many features and too many things to be looked into. I'll not go into details. What you look into hypothyroidism is weight gain instead of eating less. In hypothyroidism is weight loss instead of eating more. Rest all is like dry skin and all, you can just forget about it. From exam point of view, this is the clean picture, what you see in the exam. So now we look into the myxedema coma. If you feel I'm going really very fast, I'm going fast because of you all, but if you feel I'm really very fast, let me know. A 50-year-old woman with hypothyroidism developed persistent nausea, vomiting, underwent a laparoscopic cholecystectomy and underwent a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. So post-op, we thought patient had a small bowel obstruction. So we tried to treat patient conservatively, but patient continued to have the abdominal pain and nausea, just didn't budge, vomiting didn't budge, and patient didn't have any fever. So there was no response to treatment. And look at the bowel, there's a stasis in the bowel, you can see the gases filled over there. So ultimately surgeon came in, said let's take the patient for the exploratory laparotomy, could be a subacute obstruction which is not responding, and we also busted to a surgeon because it was out of our control. To his surprise, when he opened up, there was just 2.5 liters of fluid inside, that is ascites, and there was no small bowel obstruction. So what do? He said this is just a paralytic ileus, it's just not moving. Then someone smart guy came in and he said let's do thyroid function test, and what we found is TSH 98, more than 98, and FT4 somewhere on 1.6. So clear that this was the case of hypothyroidism, and which was progressing towards the myxedema coma. It was not a myxedema coma, I'll tell you why. So this can be seen in end stage of untreated or insufficiently treated hypothyroidism. Typically in clinical features, the elderly obese female, as I told you, hypo is obese, hyper is thin patients, become increasingly withdrawn or lethargic, sleepy, and slips into the coma. So previous history, what you have to look into those cases is someone comes up and looks into the history, had underwent any thyroid surgery in the past, was patient on certain medication of hormone replacement, and was patient on iridothioridine, and there are precipitating factors as well. So in this case, surgery was a precipitating factor. Initially she had cholecystitis, she underwent a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and maybe we missed a history of patient was on thyroxine which was not given, and patient landed up into a hypothyroidism very close to the myxedema coma. So precipitating events could be CVA, myocardial infarction, so anything which is an acute event could be a precipitating event. Even the sedatives, narcotics and potent diuretics can precipitate it. So what is the pathogenesis? Look at it, whatever comes to ultimate the result is coma. So there are too many things in the hypothyroidism that leads to the coma. So one, you start with increase intracellular T3, decrease transfusion in the CNS, alter mental status leads to coma. Decrease intracellular T3, decrease thermogenesis, there is a hypothermia again. Hypothyroid are fever, hypothermia, or myxedema coma is a cold patient. So hypothermia, decrease, and these are the points I am telling you which will be clues in the MCQs. So if the cold patient is always hypo, if there is a fever, it's hypothyroidism. Decrease sensitivity to hypocapnia or hypoxia, and respiratory insufficiency. So patients are hypercapnic, but still they don't hyperventilate. That is what the decreased sensitivity is. They are hypercapnic, still hypoventilate and further slips into coma. Decreased intracellular T3, that is cardiovascular inotropism, decreased cardiac output, increased vasoconstriction, decreased blood volume, decreased blood pressure, again coma. So whatever you do, negative fluid balance, ultimately coma. Loss of sodium, ultimately coma. So many mechanisms, ultimately patient lands into the coma. So this is why when patient progresses to coma, this is what you say myxedema. So comatose or semi-comatose, dry to skin, hoarse voice, thin dry hair, hypothermia, and there are lots of effusions. It could be ascites, pericardial or pleural effusion. And what myxedema coma is? Consciousness, delirium, hypothermia, hypoventilation. When you see these features, this is what defines a myxedema coma. So lab tests. Now this slide is very important. I'll tell you why. There's low free T4 and high TSH. So this is very typical of hypothyroidism. If the T4 is low and TSH is not high, it is normal or in the lower side of the normal range, consider pituitary hypothyroidism. Understand? So there is primary hypothyroidism and secondary hypothyroidism. So when T4 is low, TSH high is primary. When you consider secondary, T4 is low but TSH could be normal. So that is pituitary. That means TRH is not getting released by pituitary even though the TSH is okay. Then we come to the euthyroid 6 syndrome. So euthyroid is again same, low T3, normal T4, could be sometimes low, and low TSH. So this mixes with pituitary hypothyroidism, but I'll tell you the one difference which is seen. Now just look at the ECG, sinus, bradycardia, T-wave inversion all across. This is a low voltage ECG. So always someone who doesn't work is very common in Bombay. I don't know तुम लोग दिल्ली में क्या बोलते हो, लेकिन बॉम्बे में भी कॉमनली से हाइपोथायराइड साला काम ही नहीं आता है इसको. So that's the common term we use. So hypothyroid in the sense slow ECG, low voltages, patient is very numb, delayed reflexes. So this is what we use. Management of myxedema, ICU admission may be required for ventilative support with IV medication. Ventilative support when the patient is hypoventilating and hypercapnic. Parenteral thyroxine, which is not readily available these days. Loading doses IV 300 to 400 microgram followed by 50 microgram daily. Then electrolyte corrections, avoid sedation. Obviously, your patient is already in coma, so you won't be sedating the patient. And hydrocortisone controversially, but needs to be used in hypopituitarism because hypopituitarism also secretes corticotropic hormone. So there maybe you will need to use the hydrocortisone. So prognosis, mortality is 20% is not due to myxedema, is due to the mostly due to the underlying cause, which has aggravated the hypothyroidism. So again, this is the patient, thin hair, loss of eyebrows, puffy face, enlarged thyroid, which is seen in both the cases. Enlarged thyroid is seen in hypo as well as hyper, myxedema, bradycardia, poor appetite, constipation. So everything is moving slowly. In hypothyroid, everything moves fast. So you have diarrhea, here is the constipation, even the bowel is not moving, infertility, cold extremities, carpal tunnel syndrome because of edema. There's an edema, so it's touching the nerves. There's a hypothermia. So precipitating factors you know, lab you know, investigation management I have told you. So mostly supportive and treatment of the primary and supplement of the thyroxine. So now it's a thyroid storm, remember this picture, someone who's really come from the horror movie is trying to protrude towards you, is trying to go now. So acute life-threatening syndrome, it's a patient who's come to you, symptoms have worsened following a bout of respiratory infection. Again now see, there was a bradycardia, heart rate is gone up, there is a fever, pulse is irregular, ECG shows here, small goiter, congested eye with periapital swellings. So this is a very typical picture. So what is the most appropriate next management? What is your answer? How many for A? No one. How many for B? Yes, 3. How many for C? 1. How many for D? How many for E? Rest all don't want to give exam. I mean almost 200, 150 sitting here, just 5 have answered. 145 have chosen none of the above. So, which is not the answer actually. So answer is C. is you give propranolol along with the carbimazepine. I'll tell you why. There's a reason behind it. So these are the clinical manifestations already discussed with you. I'll skip the slide. Precipitating events are again the same. So what is the diagnosis? What you see in the lab is elevated T3, T4 and TSH is suppressed by the negative feedback mechanism. So what is thyrostrom? What treatment we have to do in thyrostrom is decrease sympathetic outflow. That is why giving propranolol. Also we have to decrease the production and release of hormones. This is why carbimazepine was given. And also decrease peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. This is what it does, carbimazepine. It decreases the synthesis as well as decreases the conversion. So there is a treatment triangle in thyrostrom: decrease the sympathetic flow, decrease production, decrease conversion. Again, ICU management, you all know it very well. Volume resuscitation, treat precipitating cause, PTU, becimazole, inhibit adrenergic block effects. So again, it's the same slide which explains the triangle: inhibit the synthesis, block the conversion, block hormone, block peripheral conversion. So now this is very common, amiodarone and thyroid. So what amiodarone does to thyroid? Hypo or hyper? Good. I mean, this was almost 145 of all of you had given me the answer, just 5 didn't say anything. So other way around. So it releases one tablet of amiodarone. How many? I mean, 100 milligram of amiodarone. What's the amount of iodine in that? 33, 37 it is. It's very close. So it's almost 37% of iodine in whatever tablet. So if you're giving 100 milligram per day, you're giving 37 grams. If you're giving 37 milligrams. If you're giving 200 milligram, you're giving 64 milligrams. It's almost 3 times or 4 times what we normally take daily intake. So that is the amount of iodine we are taking. So what's the Gould-Chekhov effect? There's so much of iodine available that thyroid stops producing the thyroxine and stop releasing the thyroxine. So you see hypothyroidism. Deiodinase activity is required for conversion of T4 to T3. So just decrease deiodinase activities. So amiodarone acts in many ways. Amiodarone, there's a loss of iodine. So Gould-Chekhov effects, and there's one more effect which I'll tell you come in the next slide. Which one is the next one? Jod-Best growth. So these are the two effects. Deiodinase activity, and there's one more thing. So deiodinase is also 2 types. One is 1 deiodinase, second is 1 and 2 deiodinase. So what it does, one is for the peripheral conversion, one is for the release. So it blocks both the things. Increase in the incidence of patients with anti-TPO, and we need to continue amiodarone in these conditions, and along with the replacement of thyroid. So now it also causes hyperthyroidism. One is about, everyone said, Jod-Best effects. It's opposite of Gould-Chekhov. Mechanism is same. Commonance in Graves' disease. Second is thyroiditis. What amiodarone does also is it causes folliculitis. It damages the follicular cells of the thyroid, which releases loss of thyroxine. So in those cases, you need to stop amiodarone and start patient on the anti-thyroid drug, because they might progress to the thyroid storm. So there are 2 different variations with the amiodarone. It could be both ways. So if it's a hypothyroidism, continue with it, replace it. If there is a hypothyroidism, there are 2 types, type 1 and type 2. If it's type 1, it usually auto-regulates in 2-3 months and it settles. If it's type 2, if it's a follicular damage, then you need to stop anti-thyroid drugs and stop amiodarone as well as start anti-thyroid drugs. Now there's something called as sick euthyroid syndrome. That is a non-thyroidal illness. The thyroid gland itself pulses normal without pre-existing hypothalamic pituitary thyroid gland dysfunction. So it usually comes in some kind of illness where the thyroid gland is stunned and is not producing. So as I was telling you, I'll tell you how to differentiate sick euthyroid from I can't hear you. From pituitary hypothyroidism. So how will you differentiate is T3 will be low, T4 will be low or could be lower limit of normal. TSH could be normal or lower limit of normal, ideally should be high, but should be low or lower limit of normal. But what is the difference here is RT3, reverse T3. So in thyroxine, you have 9.9% of 0.9% of RT3, 9% of T3 and rest all is T4. So usually T3 levels are within the normal limits. So because it doesn't get deiodinase, it doesn't get cleared, its levels goes high. This is how you differentiate sick euthyroid from the pituitary hypothyroidism. So now acute adrenal insufficiency. Acute adrenal insufficiency, what you see in the exam is, it usually comes like this only. HIV infected patient has pulmonary tuberculosis, or they will give you the picture of patient very thin, loss of appetite, evening fever. So that you think of tuberculosis. BP is borderline low and there are pigmentations. So whenever there are pigmentations in creases and gums, BP is low, always think of is something related to the Addison's crisis, adrenal insufficiency. So there's hyponatremia, there's hypokalemia. This is what I was telling you. We are so trained in ICU in such a nicer way. Whenever hyponatremia, hypokalemia comes you, we start initiating hyponatremia treatment, we start treating hypokalemia as well. But we don't think this could be Addison. So we see very commonly in Addison's in ICU, but we don't treat it accordingly. Unless and until the patient becomes hypotensive and we start steroids as per the sepsis guideline, but not thinking of Addison's crisis. So ultimately patient gets better. So usually presence is acute process, could be primary, secondary. I will not go into details of this, could be the sepsis. This will complicate the matter. So what is the most appropriate management in this? Hydrocortisone. Smart. So this way is good, easy for me, for you as well. So pigmentation in creases of hands, buccal mucosa and scars. Consider adrenal insufficiency, hypotension, and doesn't respond to the pressure. This is what I told you. So you'll have hyponatremia as well as hypokalemia. So if you don't have a cause of hypokalemia, if your patient is not on Aldactone, if your patient is not CRF patient, doesn't, so always saying it could be something else even if there's a relative hyponatremia. And the problem here is we all do the cortisol levels. So cortisol levels, what is the normal range? Huh? Sorry, can't hear. Someone said 5 to something. It's 5 to 20. It's 5 to 19. Somewhere around, some labs. So my lab will say 9. So what we always consider is within the normal range. But NEJM paper had come in 2012 which said random cortisol, unless and until very low, we don't miss it. So random, I'll show you. So random cortisol less than 15 is acute adrenal insufficiency. So this is where we miss it many at a time. Though you have hypokalemia, though you have hyponatremia, and your random cortisol is 9, we think it's within the normal range, but actually it is not. It's not normal. It's a acute adrenal insufficiency. So relative occult adrenal insufficiency, cortisol less than 9, you don't need to remember. The ACTH response may not predict the steroid responsiveness. It could be the secondary one. So there are two types, primary and secondary. If ACTH is low, it's primary. If ACTH is high, it's secondary. So that question you will not get, but just I am telling you. So we have post-entropin test. So inject 250 microgram of ACTH and measure serum cortisol at 30 and 60 minutes. Usually doubles in 60 minutes. Whatever your baseline was at 0, it doubles in 60 minutes. But if there is an insufficiency, it will not cross 25%. So suppose it was 10, it will become more than 20. But if it's an insufficiency, it will not be more than 15. It will be somewhere not more than 13, 25%. So it should not be more than 12.5. So this is how we diagnose it. So basal ACTH will be raised in primary adrenal but not in secondary, and CT abdomen will reveal hemorrhage or active TB or any metastatic malignancy. Understood? So adrenal, we are done with hyperthyroid, we are done with hypothyroid, we are done with adrenal insufficiency. So we'll revise it. Hyperthyroid, you will see patient thin, fever, high heart rate, diarrhea. Hypothyroidism, you will see very slow patient, bradycardic, obese, constipated. And then adrenal insufficiency, if they have to relate it to TB, they will give you a patient who is related to TB. Again, there will be a pigmentation in the mucosal and in the hands. BP will be borderline, and there will be hyponatremia along with hypokalemia. So done? So you have solved 3 MCQs by now. So now what is pituitary apoplexy? Pituitary apoplexy is either infarct or hemorrhage in the normal or in the abnormal pituitary. So it could be both. It could be infarct or it could be hemorrhage. Usually, what syndrome is this? Anyone? Sheehan syndrome. So sudden crisis in patient is known or unknown and could be a Sheehan syndrome where there is a loss of postpartum hemorrhage, hypotension, pituitary necrosis, and ultimately insufficiency. This is an emergency. Patient comes with severe headache, visual disturbances, third nerve palsy, meningeal symptoms with neck stiffness, and adrenal insufficiency, might have hypotension and collapse. So there you need to do urgent CT scan of head and pituitary. Hormonal studies only of academic interest. Why? Because you might get just a low corticotropin hormones or others also, but major diagnosis is with the clinical, and you need to do a scan of the pituitary, which is not in other cases of adrenal insufficiency. First you do the lab and then you proceed towards the imaging. But if you suspect a pituitary apoplexy, you go with the imaging first and then with the labs. So again, the replacement is dexamethasone glucocorticoid support and relief of cerebral edema, and ultimately we need to do the transmural pituitary decompression because there was a pressure on the optic nerve, optic chiasma, which is causing diplopia and blurring of the vision. Now pheochromocytoma, almost everyone knows that the commonest is patient has headache, which could be sustained or paradoxical, hypertension, sustained or paradoxical, which is more common, sustained or paradoxical? Paradoxical, 85% paradoxical, 15% sustained. So what we need to do first is, we need to block the alpha receptors first. This is the commonest MCQ. We need to block the alpha receptors first and then the beta receptors. So commonest is, would you give prazosin first or the propranolol? So always prazosin first. Why is that? Otherwise it causes rebound hypertension. And again the precipitating factors are exercise, hemorrhage, spontaneous, pressure on the abdomen, urination. So this is the commonest history: poorly controlled hypertension or accelerated hypertension, palpitations, pulmonary edema, that is negative pressure edema, paralytic ileus, hypertensive encephalopathy, patient might be little irritable, stroke, attacks build up over few minutes and fades, and signs of end organ damage. So they will give a creat level which is little high, something that sort of. How do we diagnose it? 24-hour urine for catecholamines and metanephrines. So don't wait for biochemical confirmation. Alpha antagonist first, then non-selective beta antagonist. Be aware of the postural hypertension. Moment you block both, there is a postural hypertension, but be ready with the fluids. Next is hypercalcemia. I'll rush through it. Commonest causes: hyperparathyroidism, multiple endocrine neoplasia, could be the neoplastic, could be the granulomatosis or sarcoidosis or the tuberculosis. Patient comes with history of polyuria, polydipsia, dehydration, bone pain, confusion, anorexia, constipation, could be infarct sometime. Why infarcts? Why? What syndrome is it? Hypercalcemia? Hyperviscosity. Hyperviscosity. Blood is really thick. So there's lots of resistance in the flow of the blood, and that is why you get the infarcts. Multiple myeloma में करते हो ना, when there's a hypercalcemia, what you give lots of fluids and you correct the calcium. So what you see is short QTC. In fact, ST time is also shortened. If you see ST is little normal, ST's time is shortened. So workup is serum calcium high. Always do PTH. If high is hyperparathyroidism. If it's low, it's malignancy or the other cause. It's very simple. Whenever you see hypercalcemia, do PTH. High versus low. If it's high, it's parathyroidism. If low, it could be something else. Then again you have to work it up. So treatment is loss of fluid, around 4 liters in first 24 hours. Furosemide, as it has calciuretic effect, biphosphonate, and might use steroids, especially if there is a granulomatous or there is an intoxication of A and D. So acute hypocalcemia again could be hypothyroidism, number one cause. Destruction of parathyroid, there is a history. Patient underwent a thyroidectomy and incidentally parathyroid was removed. Or there is a reduced vitamin D3. There is a chronic renal insufficiency, systemic illness, or patient on ketoconazole or doxycycline. So increased uptake of calcium in bones, you see osteometabolic hungry bone syndrome. Albumin binding in alkalosis could be in acute pancreatitis, formation of CA soaps or transfusion related citrate complexing. Symptoms are tingling, numbness, muscle cramps, carpopyramidal, ultimately seizures. So this is how we differentiate from the hypercalcemia. Hypercalcemia syndrome symptoms were polyuria, polydipsia, dehydration because there was a polydipsia, it could be a infarct because it's a hypoviscosity syndrome. So you do total calcium. Everyone knows what the ionized calcium is, how to correct the albumin. You need to know this. Then phosphate, plasma PTH, amylase and lapis to rule out pancreatitis. Treatment is first correct magnesium, then give calcium gluconate, and could be repeated as per the improvement of the symptoms and your calcium levels. So summary is acute and chronic failure or hyperfunctioning endocrine glands can result in catastrophic illness or death. We need to be aware and vigilant about it. It's also important to recognize these abnormalities and manage them appropriately. Thank you.